Oh, Stacey, thank you so much for taking the time today to be a part of our Community of Practice channel here on YouTube. I want to thank you so much for your leadership today.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm honored to be a part of this hallowed group. I've been watching a few of your interviews, and these people are so impressive. I have a little bit of imposter syndrome.
You're going to fit right in. I already can tell. You're going to fit right in. Trust me. So, So, as always, we begin by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So, if you can please do us the honors by introducing yourself to our listeners and viewers and tell us about your amazing work.
Sure. My name is Stacey Corriveau. I'm the founding executive director of the BC Centre for Social Enterprise. Originally, I hail from Ontario, but time is flying, and I'm realizing that I've now spent over half of my life in British Columbia. So I'm in the Fraser Valley of BC, which is in the traditional unceded territory of the Stalo people, specifically the Sumas, Matsqui, and Kwantlen First Nations. My true love is community economic development and particularly social enterprise. I was hoping I could share a little bit about how I got to CED because was a bit of a comedy of errors. My background was in very traditional small business counseling and accounting, single bottom line, not a lot of thought about the social, the environmental pieces. And I started to volunteer at our local Community Futures organization as a board member because I was lonely. I was a bookkeeper, still am, and was working out of my home. I was feeling isolated, and I thought I will serve a group that does business because that was my jam. And was serving as a then started serving as a on staff as a small business counselor, very single bottom line businesses, and in a sense had community economic development thrust upon me. The Community Futures group gets their core funding from the federal government. And so our BC funding was through, at the time, Western Economic Diversification, federal government arm of the government, and they were funding the CFs, Community Futures. And as the government mandates changed, so too, though a separate legal entity, really a child of the feds. And so with the awesome Paul Martin government, who understood all this stuff, the priorities of the Community Futures organizations changed almost overnight to include CED. And this was around 2003. And I have to say, it was the attitude was sort of kicking and screaming because we were so used to the safety of single bottom line, the neatness of regular traditional businesses, and we didn't know what this big hairy thing was. And it seemed to have, no boundaries or patterns. And how are we going to do it? And we had dipped our toes into economic development in the Fraser Valley, but not community economic development. So the first projects that I undertook, kind of now wearing this CED hat, and imagine having core funding to do CED. We didn't really realize how lucky we were at the time. Was to do launch a farmers market, and it's still going strong. And that was in 2004 that we had our first season. And the kind of passion of my heart was bringing self-employment development into the federal correction system. So the Fraser Valley has 7 of the 8 federal institutions in the province. And so it's really strange to say, it's an economic generator within the Fraser Valley and home to tons of federal inmates, federal being serving terms of 2 years or more. And so I went in there just planning to do our traditional Community Futures hour-long introduction to self-employment, and came out 4 hours later completely transformed. And this is all I wanted to do, was to work with this group. And so we had funding to do that. And from that, got some funding from Agriculture Canada, who was really interested at the time, because they were the co-op people, in funding innovative co-ops. So we had the idea of forming an arts co-op within the federal system. And because there were a lot of artists doing time, and particularly people doing life sentences, so long-term sentences. And I had zeroed in on a specific prison that kind of had a bit of an artist's colony. They had a lot of infrastructure to do, particularly wood and glass art. And did that for a few years, and had to introduce some policy within Corrections Canada that would permit what was called inmate operated business. And that was it for me. And that was kind of, I would say, my first taste of social enterprise. And at that point, there was no way I was ever going to go back to supporting and serving traditional business. So Paul Martin's Social Economy Initiative, I know some listeners are maybe old enough to remember that, was the promise of a lot of funding coming down to the provinces to support social enterprise research, education, and startup funds for social enterprise. And we had, at our Community Futures, kind of got in early and got a bit of funding, 3 years of funding, to start what was going to be the Fraser Valley Centre for Social Enterprise, because we knew that they were going to be funding intermediaries to educate nonprofits and charities on how to start businesses, and just thought we would get a head start and do some feasibility work. Sadly, the Martin government fell. BC only received the research tranche of that funding, and we found ourselves the only center for social enterprise when we were thinking we would just be a regional group. So pivoted pretty quickly and changed our name from Fraser Valley to BC to accommodate the audience that we were cultivating. And that's kind of how the center was born, and also kind of my first exposure to CED and social enterprise. So in 2010, with that Community Futures blessing, I moved the center out of that organization from being a project to a standalone entity. And because I'm obsessed with legal structures, I have to tell you that the center is two structures duct taped together under a common brand. It is a registered charity that does the educational work, and it is a nonprofit organization that does the fee-for-service work. So nowadays, the center is completely virtual. I think people are expecting a massive bricks and mortar operation. It isn't that at all. Providing technical assistance to social enterprise across Canada now, but clustered in BC. And the largest focus is on community-owned groups, so charities and nonprofits mainly, that are thinking of starting a social enterprise or at the early stages of their social enterprise launch. And as you might have guessed, my geeky interest is in legal structures for social enterprise and making sure that that social enterprise doesn't jeopardize the parent organization. So for example, if a charity wants to start a social enterprise, how do they structure that so as not to threaten their legal status? Just to give you a quick taste of what I'm working on right now, just released an ebook on legal structures called Legal Structures and Tax Categories for Community-Based Social Enterprise in BC. A white paper on the two hybrid structures that are available in BC, the Community Contribution Company and Benefit Company. About to go to design. I feel like I've been writing a thesis. It's been a 2-year project a free ebook funded by Inclusion BC called Venturing Forth Insights and Inspiration for Social Enterprise in the Community Living Sector. So that is a focus on folks who have intellectual and developmental disabilities and the agencies that support them in launching and operating social enterprises that train and employ those folks. About to start a 9-month project with the BC government to go into those social enterprises and give them one-on-one technical support. And then always updating the website. That's kind of where the life of the center is, because I'm only one man, where people go to the website and help themselves to up-to-date information about social enterprise.
Wow, very, very impactful, Minus. Thank you so much for that. And you actually even answered one of the questions. So that's amazing. Like what's new? You have your book launching, white paper. That's phenomenal. We appreciate all your hard work and diligence. So what inspires you about the work that you do?
Well, I can talk about what excites me right now, like the kind of the trends. What inspires me is just the idea that I have a little bit of knowledge that I can share with these groups that can help them to make greater impacts. Like that to me is amazing, and that they kind of let me into their world and kind of are open and kind of share their challenges and barriers and kind of allow me in and allow me to support them. Um, some specific elements that exciting me right now. I've been focusing a lot on work integrated social enterprises, or WISEs, which are those enterprises that offer training and employment opportunities for people who are traditionally excluded from the mainstream economy. That could be anyone. But this focus has been on folks with intellectual disabilities. And so coming out of, I should say that we think we're terrible at tracking ourselves, but we think within the sector that these WISEs make up about 1/3 of all of the social enterprises in Canada in terms of like what the focuses are on of these social enterprises. So I'm a little bit obsessed right now with the idea of wise sustainability because they have so many inherent inefficiencies built into them by virtue of what they're doing. So they're supporting folks who need support, and that costs money, and who might need special adaptive tools, or there might be wastage in inventory as they're ironing out the kinks of whatever this business is. And so the idea of social versus business costing is that to be a sustainable wise, it's not about breaking even or making a profit. It's about covering the social enterprise's business costs. So it's regular traditional business expenses with sales, and that extra, the inefficiency, which is roughly 30% of its costs, with subsidy, and that's in perpetuity. So it's getting that idea across from governments that these types of enterprises are a little bit unlike profit-making social enterprises. They may never be profitable. Imagine a business that has a 30% profit margin. It's pretty rare, and that's what they need in order to cover all of their costs. So thinking about what's the return on investment of governments funding these things. And I mean, we know all this stuff. It's the lesson reliance on the social safety net and health and the criminal justice system and all those costs. So articulating that idea, really spending a lot of time with groups about articulating what their social costs are and thinking about their returns on investment. Another piece, and it seems so obvious now that I've been, hit with it, is the idea of social acquisition and franchising. So that is purchasing a business instead of creating a business. And so there's so many upsides, that's a whole other talk, but of purchasing a business that has already proven itself and then converting it to a social enterprise, and then attached to that is the franchising idea. And my pals at Scale Collaborative are doing amazing work on this. And then personally, what inspires me, and I wouldn't lump this in with CED, but I guess it could be, is the dudes that I was working with 20 years ago in the prisons are getting out and they're in community and we're hanging out. And just to be able to be in those relationships, I don't view it as a project. It's just that I can help these people one-on-one with whatever it is, whether it's connecting them to housing or introducing them to people or thinking about employment or applying for, the last one was applying for employment insurance. And it's just a joy to be with people who appreciate every minute of every day. And these folks were inside when the internet came out, had never seen the internet, had never seen cell phones. And so one of my buddies calls himself a time traveler, right? He's been in for 30 years and then he comes into community and is expected to reintegrate. I want to flip that question over and just tell you the headlines of what keeps me up at night. I have no solutions. The climate emergency keeps me up at night,
Mhm.
and fascism at our doorstep keeps me up at night.
Right, right. Well, you know what? That kind of just, you can keep going, like your challenges and barriers in your work. Please continue.
Challenges and barriers in my work. So, watching some of the interviews that Stacey's done, I was listening to Gary Higgins of the Social Enterprise World Forum. You interviewed him last year, and I'm stealing this phrase from him. He talked about the fragmented identity of social enterprise. And that's something that I see in spades. And I think about 20 years ago when we hosted in Abbotsford, BC, one of the very first social enterprise conferences. Uh, we ate up all of that time fighting over definitions. Are you in or are you out? What is a social enterprise? That's not a social enterprise. You're not legitimate. The idea of, ownership. If it's privately owned, is it a social enterprise? If it's a profit-making social enterprise. So these are the social enterprise that I think are really bullied by other social entrepreneurs in Canada. And they're the social enterprises that are owned by community-based organizations and exist to generate a shitload of profit that they can plow back into their good works and their charitable work. And some social enterprises view these as cheating because they don't have the burden of an additional bottom line embedded within that business. So that's a quarter of the social enterprises in BC anyway that are this type. Are they in? Are they out? Thankfully, the Social Enterprise Council of Canada has recently floated a definition that I think is kind of an apple pie definition that no one can disagree with. And so I'll just say it if I could read it out here. Businesses that sell goods or services in the marketplace, check. They have a social, cultural, and/or environmental purpose, check. And they reinvest the majority of their profits or surplus to maximize their social mission. So I don't think there's much to argue about there, and I think it's sufficiently broad enough to include diversity in that definition. Um, Another piece that connects to the fragmentations, there's definition and then there's also connection. I don't feel that social enterprises are necessarily well connected or networked with each other. I definitely see a divide between community-based and owned social enterprises and privately owned social enterprises. Different conferences, different conversations, not a lot of info sharing back and forth across that imaginary barrier, I would say. There's also a tendency of social enterprises to keep things close to their chests and not share with other social enterprises. And I'm talking about best practices or connections or clients, because there's a kind of sense right now in Canada, there's not enough to go around for social enterprises. There isn't really any funding right now. We're in this weird no man's land between the grants of the Investment Readiness Program, and in BC we had enterprising nonprofits, and this promise of the Social Finance Fund, which has been kind of boiling for a couple of years, but we're still unsure of what that's going to look like. So it feels a little bit sometimes like every man for himself, which, as you can imagine, does not contribute to movement building. And so we need grants, we need more public awareness, and kind of surprised that after doing this for a couple decades, there isn't more awareness of social enterprise in the general public. And I just think about, like, the UK had Jamie Oliver as their celebrity chef, as their spokesperson for the community interest companies. And, we need a mascot or something. I think there's some policy gaps that we need to shore up. There's very little freedom for nonprofit organizations to generate a profit. We need to modernize the social enterprise rules for charities. We need to look at more permissive tax exemptions and all that fun stuff. So unfortunately, I'm one person sitting at a desk in Abbotsford in my house. So I'm feeling fairly powerless to influence the issues, but I'm taking small bites and helping groups with navigating the environment that we're in now, and trying to speak truth to power when I can.
That's amazing. That's really amazing. And it shows, when you have that diligence and that passion, for change, it is so critical. And that's really the next question I think I'll go to is, how do you feel about the future of social impact? I would say in Canada and just like overall.
So, to me, the future of social impact, and this feels like a beauty contestant question, so it's going to sound a little bit canned. It is written. Um, to me, it lies in driving systems level change. And so, not just looking at the individual organizations, but the broader social and economic structures in which they operate. And we have social enterprises, within that bigger field of social impact, that are demonstrating that it's possible to generate revenue while addressing complex societal challenges. They're not just nice to have models. They're, I think, essential tools for building equitable, inclusive, and sustainable communities. Maybe because I've been involved for so long, I'm a little bit impatient, sometimes a lot impatient, to see the acceleration of a shift in expectations from investors who are looking for social returns alongside financial ones, governments seeking partners in community resilience. There's still such a power dynamic there, and consumers, which is like should be a no-brainer, aligning their spending with their values, right? So I think we need I'm coming from the perspective really of being so interested in policy, but I think to move the needle, we need more, better, faster policy frameworks and procurement strategies and money flows that recognize and reward the entwining of impact and income. And so we have to get those conditions in place. And I don't know what the answer is. In social enterprise, it's about reshaping how goods and services are delivered, how employment is structured, and how we define value.
Exactly. One thing that I always say is that, we are laying a foundation. We are doing our part in this, how should I put it? Like this side because we have generations here and are coming Gen Z and beyond. And, they are very much adamant on holding us accountable for the things that we are doing to, kind of right the wrongs of the
Yep.
past.
Yep.
And so they're looking at us like, what baggages are you going to be leaving for us? What things do we still have to fix or to, you know what I mean? So we are definitely laying a foundation, and we know it is it's an ongoing battle, an ongoing thing that we hope that soon will be, ironed out for the better for humanity, for sure.
I
Yeah.
hear you. Yeah.
Awesome. So if I was to ask you, like, um, what does success look like to you? What would you say?
So I
Yeah, your ultimate goal too. Your
Yeah.
ultimate
So
goal.
if you familiar with lean startup? Have you heard that phrase? LEA,
Um,
lean startup?
yes, I slightly, yes.
Yeah, so it comes out of Toyota, comes out of manufacturing, but it's sort of in business planning and social enterprise. It's the idea of, you know, spending years doing planning is it's kind of a work of fiction because you're not out in the world doing it, trying it, pivoting, receiving feedback in a real lab versus being behind the safety of your desk planning. So I apply that to social enterprise startup, but I also apply it to my life and my work. I think long-term planning is a wasted effort because there's so many variables and we're in such a state of flux. So I'm more of an opportunist in a positive sense in the way that I approach the work, meaning that I'm on the lookout for ways to contribute. I never know what's going to come my way. I never know, I could be invited to do something tomorrow that I didn't even know was possible today. So my whole deal is about staying open and assessing opportunities and thinking, can I bring value to this work? Does this initiative have the potential to make solid impacts? And from the heart, do I feel a connection to these people, to this group or whatever the initiative is? So I've never worked with a vision of success. I can't imagine as someone whose kind of first life in education was around English literature that I would be doing this, right? So for me, it's just like continuing to add value, demystify key concepts, and connect groups to one another. And as long as I can be doing that, I'm where I need to be for now.
That is amazing. Well, oh my goodness, this has been Stacey, your depth of knowledge and wisdom is just so refreshing. So I know the audience will definitely appreciate all that that you're doing, and you're forward thinking. So my last question for you is your closing thoughts and calls to actions at this time.
So back in the day, we used to talk about community economic development. We used to talk about this three-legged stool. And I don't know if the younger folks have even been exposed to that. So kind of an outdated idea, but it was a simple way to think about three legs on a stool. The three legs in CED are social, financial, and environmental. They're all interreliant. So if you lose without one of those stool legs, your stool would collapse. So kind of thinking about the three-legged stool, I'm always on the hunt for and encourage social enterprises that authentically incorporate an environmental bottom line. So I don't think we see enough of those, right? And kind of the stress on authentically. And also on the hunt for social enterprises with shared ownership by the traditional business sector and the community sector. So a single social enterprises that have all of those skills and resources together at the same table.
Amazing. Makes sense. Total sense. Well, Stacey, I really appreciate this. On behalf of SETSI, we appreciate all your wisdom, all your hard work, and I always say this is like heart work. It's brain work, it's also heart work because we put our 3 Ps, our people, passion, and profit, in at the forefront, and it shows. And again, we really, really appreciate your leadership.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to babble a little bit.
Oh, it was not Bali. It's really very depth and informational. So we will close the way that we began by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So once again, Stacey, really, really appreciate you. This is not a goodbye. I know Victor will throw out some invites for some panel discussions and things like that. So again, we appreciate you and your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right. All the best here.